This crowd rises to its feet. Okoro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland front of the lane, lob to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Roan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. Well, guys, it's over. The Cavs postseason run has ended in 5 games to the New York Knicks. Carter is ducking from the grind. He's running away. He's away on business. So I brought in friend of the podcast, Mac Robinson, to join me to help discuss this Game 5 loss and some of the immediate reactions, feelings, everything that we're dealing with in Game 5. Mac, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, I guess, for the circumstances. You know, I'm happy to be on, and definitely wish it was under happier pretenses, but you know, nonetheless, happy to be on here with you there, Justin.
Oh, definitely appreciate you making the time, and you're right. It doesn't feel fun. It's really disappointed to see the Cavs drop this one. Honestly, this was a game that I thought that they would go out and win. I thought, you know, coming back home, at least push it to 6, and then we can see what happens at MSG. And it was an unfortunate timing for the Cavs to have their worst defensive half, I think, of the series. They just, all the problems that plagued them throughout the series in terms of offensive rebounding, few careless turnovers, and honestly, even some just flat out defensive lapses, whether that be in transition or in the half court. It was disappointing to see the effort that they started this game with.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing that stood out to me was the fact that, you know, and even hearing it briefly on the national broadcast there as well, you know, the fact that despite the fact that where the Cavs were offensively, they were still within 10, still within 11, still within 12. And the fact that they couldn't just get over that hump really just took that to another level, you know, and a lot of times, like you mentioned too, you know, maybe a little bit of sloppiness when it comes to some of those turnovers here and there, defensively, a few miscues here and there that led to more points off turnovers. And then especially, you know, taking a look at what happens when it comes to the second chance points, especially really stood out to me. And that was one where, despite the fact that the guy's 7 feet tall and, you know, 200 however many pounds, Mitchell Robinson looked like he had silent feet the entire night. And, you know, for him being able to get around some of those rebounds and being able to get some of those second chance points, you know, Cavs ended up having a deficit of 20-3 when it came to second chance points here tonight as well. But, you know, when it came to Did
you rebound whatever you just dropped on your desk there?
Yeah, you know what? I fumbled that one. But you know what? We're good. Screen isn't cracked. We're okay.
Good.
Yeah, we're good. But no, like when it comes to just the first half, especially like you mentioned, you know, a few times with Jalen Brunson. And again, Jalen Brunson's going to cook regardless. But at the same time, for what he was able to do, especially in just a few of those back-breaking times where, you know, even if there's a miss, just some of those tip-out rebounds, Josh Hart going in and crashing the boards, grabbing a couple extra boards there as well. You know, that's where it's more frustrating than anything, especially watching the game. Just seeing a couple of those second chance opportunities that the Knicks were able to get that really kind of put them over the top.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the appropriate place for us to really start with this is giving credit to the New York Knicks. One hell of a series from the Knicks, and they beat the Cavs at a style that I think Cavs fans in general identify with, right? Like that, whether it was with the LeBron run, generating those second chance opportunities, being that team that kind of out-toughs the opponent, the way that we would beat up on the Warriors when they're running those off-ball actions. They did all of that kind of stuff to us, and it's frustrating to be on the other side of it. It's something that I think, while we can talk about the scheme, while we can talk about, okay, what players could have done better individually when it comes to execution, they just played harder and they played like they wanted it more, which I think needs to be something that's in the mouth of all these players, right? Like that's something that's going to leave a sour taste in their mouth. And knowing how competitive this group is, I think they're going to use it as fuel. But I think from like a fan perspective, I understand the disappointment. Like this is not what you want to see. I think the Knicks team was a good enough team to beat us in a series. Obviously, they did beat us. But I think we would have expected it if the Knicks were to win, that it would be a much tougher fight than this, that the series would go long. Jalen Brunson plays outstanding. Jalen Brunson was really good. He was the best guard in the series, but he was shooting 43% from the floor, 29% from three. Julius Randle wasn't particularly great, obviously playing through an ankle injury himself. They just beat us in all of those kind of hustle metrics, which is supposed to be the kind of bread and butter for the Cavs. And as I said, I have no doubt in my mind that this is a locker room full of prideful players, and you have to expect that this is something that gives them fuel going into the summer.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, especially too when you talk about the hustle plays. And you mentioned it with Julius Randle. When you talk about the front court, dealing with a lot of issues, you would think that Julius Randle would be the front man for that. But the fact that it was Mitchell Robinson that was really doing a lot of the damage, that he was overlooked going into this series by a lot of fans. And so the fact that, you look at Julius Randle coming into this game, he was somebody that, you expect a lot out of. But if I would have told you that he went down and late in the second quarter, early in the third, and the fact that he didn't play the second half, and they still were able to control the play, especially Obi Toppin having 12 points in the third quarter, coming off the bench, like that's
backbreaking. Backbreaking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's what jumps out to me is things that normally you wouldn't think they mattered, right? Like coming into this series, you talk about, okay, well, how much does depth really matter in the postseason? How much can you really rely on second chance opportunities? It really came down to it mattering because it was in such the extreme, right? Like the Knicks just had more rotational versatility, and maybe if you had a healthy Dean Wade, it looks a little bit better. But just overall, they had the depth to play multiple different styles, and that's something that I think would be an important takeaway from the front office as we discuss kind of what we choose to learn from this season and where we'd like to improve. Obviously, you can't control what opportunities are available to you in the offseason, but that has to be something that jumps out. Is just the Cavs have a fastball, and that fastball is really good. And it's when they have all four of those guys out there with either LeVert or Okoro, whether it's through the regular season or whether it's through the playoffs, that group played well for the most part. They don't have other pitches in their arsenal, and I think that is something, especially when the construction of this team is we're going to have one of Garland and Mitchell on the floor at all times. We're going to have one of Mobley and Allen. If you don't have the supplemental pieces to make those lineups work, the whole concept falls apart.
Yeah. And I think that's where, again, right on the money with that. And, seeing how some of these different role players were able to fit in. Well, look at what happened with New York, where, again, you have somebody like, Quentin Grimes, who early on in the series was able to play pretty good defense, hit a couple of shots here and there. But then as you get on into the series, you have McBride coming off the bench for New York, coming in, giving you meaningful minutes. And again, just having, like you said, having different pitches that you're able to go to, having different, options, different tools that you can work with. And, when it came to the Cavaliers, obviously during the regular season, you had guys that were able to, go in there, play well in those roles. But as the season went along, obviously they played great in the regular season. As we get to the postseason, completely different game as we saw. And getting a chance to see how some of those guys were able to perform. Jetty had good times, had good stretches here and there. In the same way, Danny Green had solid stretches as a veteran here and there, but that's what you expect out of him. But when you're not having some of those performances like you would expect sometimes, that's where you go ahead and have some issues in that regard as well. And when you're having the issues or some of the deficiencies from the core four, at least when it came to the way that New York attacked them on defense, and seeing those and not having that depth to help support that and help supplement that, that's where it's really backbreaking.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for fans that are, feeling the pain, feeling the disappointment, like it's justified, right? Like this team earned heightened expectations, and that is going to come with increased criticism. We're going to be hearing that all throughout the summer. It's going to come with disappointment in moments like this. Like Cavs fans wouldn't be such a fantastic fan base if we got really high for those high moments when things are going well, and then we were just agnostic when things get bad, right? Like there is always a yin and yang to this, right? The hurt and pain that Cavs fans feel in this moment is what makes us such a great fan base. It's why we care so much. Like we love this team. For me, my favorite thing in the world is watching my favorite team go out there and play, rewatching it again, jumping on this microphone to talk about them. And that part, like that part of my year is over. And I have to wait until the weather turns again and to get that feeling back. And that really hurts. But like for me, I need to gather my thoughts and kind of suss through everything that I'm going through and compose myself and talk through it on the mic. For other people, they don't have to do that, right? Like you're going to express how you're going to feel it. And like I empathize with that. And I don't want like my tone right now to reflect that this doesn't hurt. This really, really does hurt. But at the same time, it's part of the gig here, right? It's to try to put this into context. And I don't want to sit here, and I'm not going to be sitting over the next couple of weeks like correcting people for feeling upset. Like that's what makes this such a wonderful fan base and such a special group, and part of why I love doing this so much.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny. I was watching one of the NBA clips that they have out, and they did a whole entire, you know, ride along with Donovan Mitchell. And Donovan talked about why he loves Cleveland fans so much, and the fact that he said, you know, these people, they know what they're talking about. And the fact that somebody, you know, reached out to him and was saying like, yeah, you missed your assignment on this defensive play. And he was like, they were completely justified. He was like, they were completely right. I missed my assignment. And so it's like, that's where you see the caring and you see the thought process behind it. You know, Cleveland fans take things in. Obviously, they're a passionate group, and being able to, you know, care enough to where, you know, we're seeing so much discourse on Twitter all over the place, basically. And, you know, I'll have people that will text me, whether it be on Facebook and then everything like that as well. And the fact that, you know, I'll have friends that will be, as soon as after game one, it's just like, God, man, this team is so tough to deal with against New York. And then after game two, all right, we're back, Cavs in 5. Like the ups and downs of it. But I mean, that's being a fan. And that's why, like, again, I love this Cavs fan base, especially because, like you said, I mean, for us, we kind of take things in. We have to, you know, compartmentalize a little bit, take in what we've seen, and then try to give out the best, you know, takes and honesty that we have with it, while also being fair. And that's where, you know, for fans, it's just take in, just unload it. And that's where, again, I love it when it comes to Cleveland fans, especially. The passion is there compared to, you know, other fan bases that, you know, may or may not even want to show up, even if they're in the playoffs, even if it's like midway through the first half. And, you know, seeing that difference and that passion, I think that's what makes me love Cleveland fans, especially.
Yeah. And I said before the series, like, I was ready to be hurt. That's what I said coming in, because I was like, this probably isn't going to end in a championship. I thought it was going to end later than this. I wasn't expecting the hurt to take this form, but like that's part of the ride, especially when you have a team that projects to be together for a while. And I know people are going to rush to judgments. When I had Jay King on earlier this year talking about kind of Boston and their process, that was something he talked about, and I thought was really fitting at the time, and I think it's important to reflect on now, which was, yeah, Boston started with Western or Eastern Conference Finals runs those first couple years, but then they dropped to the play-in. They lost in the first round. They had these setbacks. It was, can Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum play together? When you earn expectations, when people think that, hey, this is a team that has all these great regular season metrics, when you have those expectations, when things go wrong, it's going to invite a lot of noise. And if you have confidence in what this front office can do, if you have confidence in the individual players, you are going to believe that, hey, they can get through this. They're going to take a sober look at what needs to improve individually, whether that's from JB down to Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, Allen, LeVert, Okoro, all those guys, whoever's back, they're going to have to look at what they need to improve internally. I think the front office is obviously going to look at every avenue to get better. And I mean, reflecting back even on the Mitchell trade itself, I think it's a good thing that we got tested. We wouldn't be here. We'd probably be a play-in team without that move. And having someone like Donovan Mitchell, who had a phenomenal best season of his career, having him bring us to this moment and seeing, hey, we still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of growth to do. In some ways, being stress tested in that way against a team like the New York Knicks, who really, their strengths were in all the pain points for the Cavs when it comes to offensive rebounding, valuing those kinds of possessions, the physicality that they could bring. That was the best offensive rebounding team in the league against the worst defensive rebounding team post All-Star break, right? Like, they were built in a lab, and we probably didn't account for that enough. Yeah. Just their ability to put pressure on all of those pain points for the Cavs. The fact that we're tested in that way and the flaws were revealed is probably a positive when you're talking about this being early in the process.
Yeah, and especially, too, you mentioned the Boston Celtics. Look at that first, those first couple of Eastern Conference final runs. Compare that to what team they had in the finals last year. The growth that they have, and not only that, but also seeing the development of players that have come along. All of a sudden, you mix in a Grant Williams that they were able to draft and develop along as well, finding different role players, and not only that, finding the right mix of veterans in there as well. That's a great point there as well, where the fact that, again, Donovan Mitchell was the oldest starter in the lineup, at least for the Cavs, other than Caris LeVert when he was coming in. But, mixing in different veterans, mixing in different personalities into this group, this is year one. And I think, like you said, it was a great point where, you expected some heartbreak this year. You didn't expect a full finals run, but at the same time, you expected it to be a little bit longer. But having this first year and seeing those deficiencies and seeing those flaws with this team and being able to, read and react in free agency, and not only that, but also see it very openly and not even just like, all right, maybe it was depending on a matchup here and there that could have been exploited. It was pretty much like you said, this team was made in a lab to deconstruct everything that the Cavs did well. And so for this team, I think that this is a great opportunity for, Kobe Altman and the staff. I know that they've been working for months at this point, looking ahead. Meanwhile, you and I are probably just, we'll probably start at 12:01. But at the same time, taking a look at how this team was built, seeing those pressure points and seeing where this team can adapt and see what team is going to be rolling out for, 2023, 2024 coming up in a few months. I think that's going to be interesting to see the development of this team here going forward.
Yeah, it really will be. And I remember listening to JB Bickerstaff on JJ Redick's podcast, a lot of J's there. And he was talking about how he understands that in today's NBA, it's a partnership, right? Like when it's coaches and players, like if you're not talking to them on their level and getting input and working back and forth, you're not going to have success. And Kobe Altman's talked about the same thing. So their understanding and the way that they've communicated that, like, to me, it gives me confidence, because at the end of the day, even though all four of the core had bad games, bad stretches, and probably a bad series overall for all of them by their standards that they have played to earn kind of that expectation, I expect every single one of those guys to be competitive, to use this as a learning experience. I talked about how Jared Allen, when we talked to him at Media Day before last season, was saying, no, I'm not really a talker. And then by the end of the year was saying, hey, I recognize that I need to go out there and I need to talk more. Like, Jared Allen had an awful series by his standards. Like, there's no way around it. And the thing that stood out to me was he got worse as the series went on. He started with that 14-14 game in game one, right? Like, making a big impact. Had 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, 3 blocks in their game 2 win. And it's just like the physicality just wore him down throughout this series. And I think it's important to remember that he's the same age right now that Tristan was in the 2015 finals run. Like, he is really, really damn young. And I would expect that a point of emphasis for him that the Cavs will bring up, that he will be feeling after this series, is I got to add strength. I need to be able to bring the impact that Cavs fans are accustomed to me seeing to situations like this. And Mitchell Robinson is an outlier, right? Like, there's not many guys that damn big and that damn strong. And it wasn't just that one individual matchup. It was a team rebounding effort. Evan Mobley needed to be a lot better on the boards. Our wings, our guards needed to be better boxing guys out. Some of that was, the Knicks do have some wild misses that rebound really far out, right? Like, it was a team effort, but I think from his perspective, that obviously has to be a point of emphasis going into this offseason, because internal growth is still going to be the biggest thing that closes the gap. Like we can make adjustments, or not we, but the team can make adjustments in the supporting cast, get that kind of rotational versatility, add some more front court players that can give you supplemental rebounding and all that kind of stuff. But it's still going to come down to these four guys and what type of growth they show.
Yeah, and I think that's, hitting the nail on the head there, especially because, for as much as we can talk about, the role players and everything like that, and obviously, as we saw in this series, depth plays a big part of this. But at the same time, that's where you also see some potential growth from some of those guys. What does Isaac Okoro do after this offseason? Yeah. Because out of all the guys that obviously, a lot of the guys had poor series, but Isaac was one of those guys, at least, that was in the right place at the right time, making the right cuts, getting those rebounds, getting those layups, hitting a couple of threes on the outside. I know he started off slow, but, was able to play well on the outside, on the offensive side. But on the defensive side especially, really was locking down Brunson in that second half and really was one of the main reasons why they were why they were able to keep it close. So
he was cutting well, too. He took a contested three, right? Like he had a quick trigger on it. Like, it wasn't the version of Isaac Okoro we saw last year in the play-in where it looked like he was scared and kind of standing around. Like he was out there competing. And again, this is one of those moments where it's probably important to note that he's the same age as Evan Mobley.
Yeah. And the fact that he was playing with purpose. And it really felt like he was able to, just have a knack for finding the ball over and over again. That was huge for him especially. But, seeing the growth from some of those role players as well. And I think especially, like you mentioned, too, the fact that, Jared Allen's same age as Tristan Thompson in the 2015 finals. And like you mentioned, too, Evan Mobley. I mean, I would say this. If Evan Mobley and Jared Allen don't have a protein shake sponsorship by the end of the offseason, I don't know what went wrong. Because
Cleveland food scene's too good for them to stay this lean. We got to get on that. We got to get some squats going. Yeah.
Right. But that's where, for Jared Allen, that's something where, this is an important lesson for him. And I think almost similar to how you mentioned with Isaac last year, I think you could see an opportunity for growth from Jared from this kind of a series next year. And I think that's something where, again, just having a type of series like this, obviously, is it one that you want to have as a fan? No. But at the same time, it's something that, you see the areas that this team can grow in. And it's not like you're dealing with guys that are, up there in age, at least, or in their upper 20s, lower 30s at this point. You're not dealing with a Miami Heat that feel like they're consistently on the last ride every single year. Yeah. But, for this team, again, I mean, Donovan, 26, Jared Allen, 24, Isaac, 22, Mobley, almost 22. Yeah. At this point. So for those guys, there's a lot of room to grow, and that's where I'm going to be interested to see, how this team, takes that offseason step and takes something like this that is as bad of a loss when it comes to a series loss, but at the same time, the ability to grow from that into this next year. I'm going to be really interested to see how these guys look coming back.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that they can grow into something that's as special as the support that we get from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. There really is nobody that you can point to and say, they had a great series and it was everybody else that lost. Like, even in this game, it's so funny. You got Caris LeVert, 17 points, 4-7 from 3. Honestly, Caris probably had the most steady series outside of that game one. He was probably one of the more reliable contributors in terms of a baseline, which is hilarious, but he stepped up and he did his part. Yeah. Isaac Okoro, 10 points, 2 of 3 from 3. Jetty, 2 of 4 from 3. This was a night where the Cavs shot better. They shot 39% from 3. Knicks shot 31%. Cavs shot 46.7% from the field. Knicks shot 43.5%, right? There's been so much focus on, the Cavs postseason defense it didn't hold up to the what they did in the regular season. It was better than it was in the regular season. The problem was the offense was so bad, and they gave the Knicks so many second chance opportunities. And they were bad in ways that I do think are fixable, right? I don't think any of this is fatal flaws. Some of it's roster construction, some of it's growth and physical maturity. I mean, we talk about Jared. Go look at the pictures of Tyson Chandler in Chicago and then like Dallas. So, like some of this is just, becoming an adult and getting on the other side of 25 years old. But there are ways to improve this and to deal with some of these shortcomings. And they're going to need to, because honestly, this Knicks team isn't going anywhere. Like, that's a well-built team that's built for sustainable success, and they still have assets in their chamber to go out and make a move. Now, when they make a consolidation trade, if they end up doing that, they're probably going to deal with some of the stuff the Cavs have to go to, which is not having that depth, needing another offseason cycle to build out the supporting cast and to really kind of flush out the rotation. But that's going to be a team that the Cavs are going to have to see. And while some of the teams at the top are a little bit of an unknown, we don't know what's going to happen with Philadelphia. Obviously, the Chris Middleton situation in Milwaukee is something that they're going to have to deal with. The Knicks are probably going to be here for a while. And this, if this is chapter 1 of the rivalry, I hope the rest of the book gets a little bit better.
I was going to say, this reminded me, and this was obviously, I was younger when it came to this, but, that Wizards-Cavs rivalry that you saw built up in the first LeBron run where, just year one, it was just the back and forth and the fact that, it ended up with Papa John's having to give out free pizzas to Cleveland fans because they were upset about the fact that they were supporting Deshaun Stevenson in that run. Like, seeing all of that rivalry, it starts. And you got to have something that starts up that series. And I think one aspect that I think kind of gets a little bit overlooked here, too, is the fact that, we talk about how young the Cavs core is. And, I think that you look at the Knicks core and the fact that they're a little bit further into their prime. And at least physically, Julius Randle dealt with being with the Lakers, obviously dealt with being with other squads there as well. And, for the Knicks, he's had time to build himself up. And you've had Mitchell Robinson have time to build himself physically as well. So I think that this is chapter 1. Like you said, they've dealt the first punch. They've won the first battle, and I think it's going to be interesting to see who ends up winning that war, at least, and seeing how this goes going forward. Because, I would say this, at least for chapter 1 between the fans, I think that was something that was definitely entertaining to watch, to say the least. Yeah,
and honestly, I hope Randall's okay. I saw Ian Begley mention that he wasn't wearing any supports on his ankle when he's in street clothes. They 100% deserve this series win. They were they were the better team over this series without a doubt. It's as much as we're disappointed, I don't want to take away from the Knicks, and I want them to be able to continue and have a good run and showcase what made them so tough in this series, right? It sucks. I hate this. But that's it always gives me a little bit of comfort if they can go out and really push some other teams that we like and respect and are good, right? Because then that sliding scale kind of changes. Like when early in the season, when the Cavs lost to the Kings, and it was, oh my God, what a terrible loss. This Kings team sucks. And then looking back on the season, you're like, oh yeah, so Cavs, you guys playing with the flu. We lost to a very good Sacramento team. Okay, that makes a little more sense now in hindsight.
Right, and it's all about context at that point too, and seeing where that team kind of develops, everything like that. Like you said, we have our preconceived notions going into the year of what a team is going to be. And, I'm not watching all of the Kings games, nor is anybody watching every single team's game. So at the same time, they'll have their preconceived notions and what they thought of last year. And that's where, again, like you mentioned, some of these teams, seeing how these teams develop, seeing how these teams play. I mean, hell, with the way that, a lot of people were talking about the Miami Heat late in the season and saying, is this it for Miami? Meanwhile, they're pushing Milwaukee and have Milwaukee on the brink of elimination. So
big, heavy dose of context there with the Giannis injury, but still,
right.
They do look awesome. Sure. They do look awesome. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, Jimmy Butler dropping, almost 60 in a playoff game, seeing some of those, everything like that. But, again, seeing how some of these different teams develop when it comes to the season, especially, I think you can get context clues as the season goes along. But especially like you said, I mean, we have thoughts on certain teams, obviously, hell, it's one of my favorite throwaway jokes in Soul from Pixar, where it's just, I like messing with this team, and it's always, and the Knicks lose again, And so, like, seeing how, that team has progressed this year, especially under Thibodeau, where, again, constantly we'll see that team maybe, go down over the next few years. But seeing this team step up and play well for him this year, especially, and seeing that come together, especially after, not having that Donovan Mitchell deal go through in the offseason, obviously benefit to us. But, hey, they got the win in the end of the postseason. But playing well despite that, I think that's something that's interesting. And like you said, just got to give it up to them for how they played this season.
Yeah, I got to be honest, man. I haven't watched Soul. I haven't watched a lot of the new Pixar movies because I just don't want to cry.
Oh, I get it.
And I know they're going to be good, and I know it's going to hit me in all those tough spots. And honestly, that's going to be a reason why I don't rewatch this game. I hope everyone can forgive me that this is going to be one that I pass up on. But one of the things we talked about early in the season was that it's always going to be easier for teams defensively in the postseason to take away two smaller guards. Just what they're able to do. It's easier to take that away if there isn't a front court playmaker, a front court initiator. And that guy needs to be Evan Mobley. That's the whole kind of conceit of this team building is Evan Mobley needs to be that guy. And I thought there was a lot of really positive indicators going into the playoffs, from January on, basically being a 19 point per game guy. And one of the reasons why I think this series went sideways was Mobley just didn't step up to that challenge offensively. Now, him taking Julius Randle out of the series defensively, I think deserves a lot of credit. I think he was out there competing, and again, 21 years old. It's ridiculous. This guy's insane. But he just wasn't there offensively. And I think when you this is the best way I can sum it up. He was playing about 38 minutes per game. He's averaging 9.8 points per game on 45% shooting. Isaac Okoro, who played 15 minutes per game, averaged 6.4 points per game. That's not a big drop off in quite a few less minutes, right? And it's not like Okoro, someone out there that they're drawing up a lot of plays for, right? If a lot of what the Knicks are doing in terms of throwing bodies, throwing traps, really trying to destabilize what the Cavs are doing offensively, beyond the off-ball cutting and jamming cutters and that kind of stuff that they were doing, they were really making life hard for Garland and Mitchell at times. And you need to have that front court guy that just attracts so much attention. Even think how much attention Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson draw just because of their ability to attack the basket and generate those second chance opportunities, right? You start scrambling as a defense because you have to make sure that Randall's contained. You have to make sure that he is not getting a second chance opportunity. Or you have to make sure that Mitchell Robinson's not getting in on the boards as well. You have to make sure Josh Hart isn't, right? Having that interior presence bends a defense. And I mean, I don't think anybody reasonable is selling Mobley stock after this, but it's just one of those things, right? I think it's really, really important that we highlight and showcase where guys like Garland, Mobley, Mitchell, Allen struggle, because when they make that growth, it's easier to point that out, right? Rather than saying, no, everything's fine, I'm blaming someone else. You know what? This is all Jetty's fault. I've decided this is all Jetty's fault, right? If you're doing that, then there's no reward for seeing these guys grow up. And I think that's obviously a big part of an experience of dealing with a young team like this.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because, when you saw the defense attack, obviously Mitchell and Garland, one of the big things that, I had noticed, at least, it seemed like early on in the season when they had that big winning streak, what did you see? You saw a lot of ball movement, players moving without the ball, trying to create those open looks, going with that extra pass. And a lot of times it felt like they were rushed and maybe just trying to, get a quick shot up here and there, but less ball movement, especially. Yep. It felt like, and getting a chance to see that, especially having somebody like Mobley basically act as that safety valve to kind of decompress that a little bit, have Mobley or have Garland and Mitchell go off ball a little bit, stretch that defense out. I think that could help. And I think that, like you said, that's that next step, especially for this offense and for the team going forward, is seeing that next step from Mobley and seeing how that can, affect the offense as a whole. Because at that point, that takes a little bit more of the burden off of Donovan Mitchell. And, one thing I'll give Mitchell credit for, especially early on in the series, and I saw it, especially tonight a little bit here and there and also in game 2, was, his activity on defense, especially, and the aggressiveness going after the ball. Trying to create a couple of steals here and there and exerting some more energy in that side of it. And for him, I think that if you're able to have somebody else on offense, able to take off a little bit of that burden, have him create a little bit without the ball, I think that could also help, and that could go a long way for him as well. And that was something that really stood out in my mind, especially when it came to Mitchell. Garland, I thought, played pretty solid on defense, but obviously, we saw some of the lapses here and there when it came to the defensive side. But, again, I think that, like you said, when it comes to Mobley, that was something that down the stretch we saw really was able to create quite a bit for the Cavs. And I think that for him going forward, if that's something that they're able to work on in the offseason, improve, and really add that offensive dimension, because, again, you're not sticking Evan Mobley in the corner and, attracting the defense in that sense. But for him, if he's able to, maybe work on that jump shot a little bit, maybe get a little bit more pick and pop action, and then for him able to go ahead and be that offensive hub for the team, I think going forward that could open up quite a bit for the Cavs and have both Donovan and Darius be able to work off ball as those 3-point shooters on the outside.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one of the things that I'm really hoping for going into next year, whether it's going to be a combination of things, right? Like they are going to have their mid-level exception to use. I think there's a lot of attractive names, and we'll get into those in the offseason, but there's a lot of guys that make a lot of sense. I think Caris LeVert, I would assume at this point, like just from a team control standpoint, you're probably bringing him back. I would assume that unless a real great opportunity came along, I think Isaac Okoro is going to be back, so we'll see what kind of growth he has. But I think one of the things I'd like to see next season is the rotation and the lineup and the roster overall being at a place where so much experimenting isn't necessary. Because I really do feel like you start the year with Caris start, and then you have a long stretch with Lamar, and then you have Isaac, and then, guys are kind of in and out of the lineup, and we just don't really, like, it made it harder, I think, to build an identity as a team. And I mean, some of that's guys not rising to the occasion, right? Like it took a while for Okoro to rise to the occasion. And unfortunately, missing 3 weeks going into the playoffs, I think that definitely had an impact on his ability to help out there. I mean, I did not feel comfortable in game one sitting in the stands watching him hit the ground holding that knee multiple times. Like, that didn't feel great. But I think you saw as the series got on and he started to get his sea legs back, he started to make an impact. And I'm still holding a lot of Okoro stock. I'm holding stock in all these guys, right? Like, and I do think the fact that it's a team-wide failure is something that it helps them as a group, right? Like, it's a shared experience. Donovan Mitchell, our buddy Evan Damrell, tweeted this out, a quote from postgame, but Mitchell said, in the last 2 years, he hasn't been the player that the team needed him to be in the postseason, both with the Cavs and with the Jazz, and it frustrates him to no end. I believe that. I absolutely believe that. And a big part of this, a big part of why we lost the series was this was just an abnormally bad series for Donovan Mitchell. He just didn't shoot the ball well, missed a lot of open looks. And when the margins are so tight, like, I know some of the final scores got away in this, but a lot of that is kind of late buckets. Almost every one of these games, with the exception of game 3, was within the Cavs' reach at some point. And, just better performances out of Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell would have went a long way. As much as we can talk about Mobley playing better, opening things up for him, better options within the rotation, helping them out. There was also just so much food that they left on the table individually. I don't think you can pass off that blame to anybody else. Yeah,
and I think that, you look at going into the series, so much talk was about the fact that Donovan Mitchell was 6th all-time for highest scoring average and almost 29 points a game per game in playoff action. The series averaged 22 points a game. And, that was going into tonight.
I think it went up to 23.
Okay.
So not much of a bump, yeah.
Yeah. But, that's where, again, Garland coming in, averaged 20.5. Again, and Caris, he went up in average. But, again, that's where, for Donovan being down that many points, and especially, for him having, in tonight's game alone, 11 for 26 from the floor. and 3 of 12 from deep. Like that's not something that you expect from a guy that, you expect to be that playoff dog that's going to be out there, that's going to be able to make those threes and be able to create those plays and be that guy that, defenses have to watch out for over and over again. Obviously, you do regardless. It's Donovan Mitchell. But, at the same time, when he's on and he's able to have some of those games, that's something that, that at least for me, I felt like I was kind of waiting for a little bit this series, was that Donovan Mitchell, 40-point, 45-point game out of him. But obviously, again, just a down series for him, with the team. But like you mentioned, I mean, that's a void that, you can't have a role player fill in that kind of a void. No. And you can't have somebody that just comes off the bench that's going to be able to go ahead and give you that in one game. But that's where I think it's one of those big holes in the void that I think the Cavs weren't able to fill. And I think that, like you said, I mean, the fact that, Donovan mentioned the fact that, he disappointed in this one, he's disappointed in the result and how he played. I think that's something that, like you said, it's truthful. And I think that for him, it's just being honest about it and looking at how, this team played. I think that, it's a Donovan Mitchell, not a Donovan Mitchell problem. I don't want to say that. No, it's basically, it was a hole that wasn't there that he wasn't able to fill. That's the only thing. And it's disappointing, but again, it's not any one player. It's, you have other guys that, were down in average when it comes to other players as well. And again, just looking at how this team performed, like you said, I think that there's a lot of room for growth, and I think that this is a team that, I hate to quote Ty Lue with the wins and lessons, but I mean,
it's still applicable.
Yeah, it's applicable. It's applicable as hell right now when you look at the results for the playoffs here and seeing how this team dealt with this team especially and dealt with the physicality. I think that was something that was also a good test. To see. Obviously, you don't want to have it result in being bounced from the playoffs, but again, just seeing how this team was able to respond to this kind of a test, I think is good for the future at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And Darius Garland, I expect more out of him. And like, it's funny too, because with DG, like you look at kind of the game by game box scores, and game one probably more tentative than he needed to be. But like he shot well for the series. Like that's kind of the wild thing, is even with that 4 of 21 stinker, like still shot, 44% from the field, 39% from three, about 21 points per game for the series, right? Like I think that's something you can build off of, right? Like, and I do think that he needs to get better. I think this whole team needs to get stronger. I think a big part of why they went away from the movement within their offense was they just got sick of getting hit by the Knicks. Like they didn't like getting roughed up off ball, and they stopped moving because they didn't want to get hit. Like that was my big read on this. And that's something that can happen. Like I talked about it on the last podcast, but my mind goes back to The Last Dance where the Jordan Bulls just got the hell beat out of them. And they're like, that's not happening again. And if these guys are the level of competitors that I believe them to be, I think there's a reason why this was a 51-win team. Like I expect them to rise to the occasion here. I expect them to really use this as fuel, and it just sucks, man. Like it sucks. This was such a great season, and expectations are going to be up, man. Like it's from this point on, it's big boy pants time. Like this is it. It's not going to be fun story from here on out. I mentioned earlier how it's a collaboration between the players and the coaching staff and the front office. That means that both sides are auditioning for one another at all times, right? Like even when you're under contract, it's always trying to maintain that level of buy-in from the team. And I do think that there's an opportunity here for Kobe, Mike Ganzi, like the front office as a whole. This is going to be their first draft and their first free agency window with Donovan Mitchell on the roster. They also have Darius Garland, who's a wildly popular player here, right? Like there's a very clear need for a veteran role player that fits well with this team, and they're going to have mid-level exception to pitch players with, right? They didn't burn up all their second-round picks. They didn't use 5 second-round picks on Jay Crowder, who's currently struggling in Milwaukee, right? So you have that in your arsenal. You have non-guaranteed deals. You have a whole bunch of things to work with to find that value on the margins, whether it's straight up, whether it's a free agency, whether it's being a third team in a deal, trying to find those avenues. Like, this is going to be a really, really important offseason for Kobe Altman, and he's going to need to get creative because we have the core of something special here. It just needs the right parts around it. And some of that is the core improving itself. Some of that is that supplemental talent as well.
Yeah, and I think that, the one thing that I remember cautioning Cavs fans too before the Donovan Mitchell trade, the fact that first year, the getting into the play-in, that's the fun ride where you didn't have the expectations going into the year, and it's just able to take in what you're able to take in. Getting Donovan Mitchell, all of a sudden now it's just like, all right, let's see. We have some expectations. Let's see how they react. But at the same time, you're still in year one. Now, like you mentioned, the fact that this is the first full offseason with Donovan Mitchell, one of the things that we heard constantly was the fact that Donovan Mitchell is one of the most popular players in the NBA. And he's one of those guys that has that kind of respect from players all across the league. And so being able to have that flexibility, and like you mentioned too, you have the mid-level exception and the potential additions that you're able to have. But not only that too, but the talk around the league that was going around even before the Donovan Mitchell deal about the culture around Cleveland. And the fact that what JB Bickerstaff and Kobe Altman were able to build up in terms of culture, that was going around the league. So all of a sudden now you mix in Donovan Mitchell, one of the most popular players in the league, along with the Cavs culture that's already been, talked about around player circles, then at that point, I want to see, how creative can you get, when it comes to, Kobe Altman and Mike Gansey. We've seen previous regimes and the creativity when it comes to adding in certain trades, free agents, and figuring out which levers to pull. And so I'm going to be curious to see in this offseason what players are you able to bring in, what players want to come in, and especially seeing how that kind of reshaping could look and how that full offseason, I think this offseason especially, like you mentioned, I think it's going to be one of the most fascinating ones from that standpoint, just because of the fact that you've seen what this team has, you've seen how this team reacts to each other, and you're able to see how this team is able to build going forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the point about the culture is an important one, but I do think we're at a point now where that torch has to be passed.
Yep.
I think Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, and even, to some extent, Evan Mobley, those need to be the culture setters. Like, it's not veterans like Kevin Love or Danny Green or anyone else. Your leadership needs to be your best players. And I think, I mean, it's probably is the case, but a lot of that responsibility now is probably going to shift onto those guys' shoulders moving forward. And these are guys that welcome that kind of responsibility. So I do think in terms of roster building, I don't know how much I'd even be considering that, right? Like, you want to have guys that you feel confident they're going to buy into the system. They're going to buy into the role that's available to them. And you have to value culture from that standpoint. But in terms of, leadership on the bench and stuff like that, like I just, that doesn't need to be much part of the equation anymore in my eyes, right? Like, it's buy into the system, buying into what I can do alongside these guys. That needs to be the number one priority.
Yeah, and I think that it also adds on to the point that you brought up earlier, where it's talking about the tools that you have in your toolbox. When you're talking about certain guys that are viewed as culture guys, but might not necessarily get as many minutes, it's what's coming to the table at a certain point. And that's where, if you're able to have somebody who might have a different skill set compared to, somebody like a Danny Green, somebody like a Jetty Osman, so somebody that can change up, give you a different look in the lineup at that point going forward, and seeing those different avenues that you're able to pull if you're JV Bickerstaff, dealing with a series like this where you're dealing with somebody that's, more physical, and okay, hey, we can go ahead and pull this lever, put this guy in, and we should be okay to help counterbalance that a little bit. That's something where I'm going to be interested to see, like you said, culture, it needs to be shifted over. Darius has been in this for a few years now at this point. He's a veteran in the league now at this point, going into his fourth year. So, for
fifth.
Between him, fifth. Yeah, there we go. Losing track of time at this point. But, seeing all these guys, I mean, actually, Darius has been in the league for half a decade at this point. Like, seeing how these guys have been in the league and, for Donovan being in there as well, again, you got to take the torch at some point. And these guys have to be those leaders. And at that point, not necessarily having somebody like a Ed Davis on the end of the bench where, he might play 20 games or, in the Cavs case in that season where, 3 guys go down and all of a sudden he's starting against Brooklyn. But, seeing how some of those guys near the end of the bench that aren't really getting that much playing time, instead focusing more on, getting some guys that, bring a different skill set to the table that you can go ahead and pull into this series that you might not necessarily, have in going forward, depending on the matchups that you have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I'm always rooting when I have a take that isn't flattering for the Cavs. I'm always rooting to be wrong. I value how the Cavs do over my own opinions. But one thing I talked about all year, even when we started 8-1, even when things were going really good and we were on winning streaks, I always said I value the importance of experience so much in the playoffs. And it's not just playoff experience, right? Like, we can't say, oh, well, now that they've got a taste, it's always going to be consistent. Kyrie, in games 1 and 2 of 2016 and games 1 and 2 of 2017, played like crap. Like, he played really, really bad. But learning from playoff experience and learning from the failures is understanding there are going to be those ebbs and flows. I am going to play really poorly at times, and learning from that experience. And for the Knicks, they got a lot of young talent. They have a lot of really good young talent, but you have Julius Randle, 28 years old, Jalen Brunson, 26 years old, Mitchell Robinson, 25 years old, right? Like, these are physical, mature guys that have experience. They have experience in the league. Josh Hart has a lot of experience in the league and playing in playoff races. It's not the same as being in the playoffs, but that experience and that physical development matters. For the Cavs, they need to learn from this experience. This needs to be fuel for them, because even someone like RJ Barrett, right? Like, the last time the Knicks were in the playoffs, they got punked. They lost in 5 games, and RJ Barrett played like hell the first 2 games in the series. He was just not good. And from then on, he was a big-time difference maker for the Knicks. That's the type of toughness that you want to see. RJ didn't even have a great year overall. He had ebbs and flows. I know this well. He's on my fantasy team. I'm like, I was riding that wave. Sometimes
I know you were.
Sometimes the stocks were high. Sometimes the stocks were low, my friend. But it's that kind of toughness, that kind of resolve, understanding what it feels like to be down and not wanting to feel that again. That's what it's all about from here on out. And there's going to be noise. There's going to be doubters. If the Cavs get off to a great start next year, if they have the number 1 net rating in the league and the offense is even better than it was last year and the defense is still number 1, and they're top 2 seed in the Eastern Conference, you're still going to have people that said, oh, well, look at what happened in the playoffs. And you know what? That's fair. That's fair. That's justified. I'm probably going to disagree with it depending on what it looks like, but there's going to be doubters. And that's not something that you're not going to change your mind. You're not going to change their minds, I should say, until you go out and do it. That's part of the game. That's part of the process.
Yeah, and I think that another important part too is even look at what RJ Barrett did in game 1 and 2 of this series. He was somebody that didn't score well, didn't shoot well, but then all of a sudden you saw game 3 on. All of a sudden you look like Maple Jordan out there, like some people were expecting. And so for him, I think that when it came to RJ, like, you saw him all of a sudden in game 5 have a little bit of that swagger to him. When he was able to knock down a 3-pointer. Yep. And so for him, I just look at it where, like you said, taking that initial playoff experience, taking that the poor series and able to learn from that and go forward. And especially for a young team like this is something where you're going to have a lot of these, but at the same time, don't take it for granted either. Don't go ahead and have fans going to have the expectation, all right, cool, we'll be back next year. But as a player, it's going to be, hey, look, this is what I got to do to improve. I got to take my stuff to the next level. I got to take my game to the next level. And so getting a chance to see how some of these players will come back next year, especially, I'm not expecting Evan Mobley to come back and, look like Giannis going into this year.
I mean, if he wants to,
if he wants to, I'd be happy with it. Trust me, I'm not expecting it. I'd love it, but I'm not expecting it. But that's something where that's another that can be another part that we might not necessarily see. We can expect some growth on the court, but when it comes to the physicality side of it, because they're so young, there's so many different variables that this team can take that next step with. And I think that's what's, exciting for me at least, is that, this team on the court, like you mentioned, I mean, Caris pretty much had a pretty consistent series. I mean, and the way that he played this year felt like he fit in. He was able to find his groove, find a role that I think worked well for him. And I think that that's a scenario where, look at last year, dealt with, going into play-in, had a little bit of a struggle here and there, but, had his ebbs and flows. But by the time that we got to the postseason, he was able to find his role. And like you said, he was probably the most consistent Cavs player that we had in the series. Yeah. And so...
And like Carter and I wanted to move at the deadline, right? Like not necessarily Caris, but we understood that, hey, that's like something that the Cavs are weighing, and sticking with him was a bit of a gamble. And I mean, he played well, right? Like that part of the vision, you can see why there was a value in it. Throughout the regular season, their best lineup was the core four and Caris LeVert. Coming into this game, their best lineup in the series was the core four and Caris LeVert, right? Like there's a vision there, and you can understand the value that he can bring as a six man and that guy off the bench. Yeah.
And I think that for me is the biggest step for him, because like you said, I mean, when you have Donovan and Darius playing, they're not going to play all 48 minutes together. When you stagger both of them, you have somebody like a Caris LeVert that can be that other outlet, that other ball handler to take off some of that pressure for them. And not only that, the fact that he was able to shoot as well from beyond the arc as he did this year compared to what we saw last year. And, I remember, the talks of that being the biggest complaint that a lot of fans had was the fact that Caris LeVert isn't a great three-point shooter historically. All of a sudden this year in the regular season, he shot almost 40%. So,
on good volume.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, for him taking that next step, and not only that too, the underrated part that, we've talked about it a little bit, but just outright, saying it, Cavs development staff, they do a great job with these guys and taking their games to the next level. But on top of that, knowing what guys can go ahead and improve under this system and with these guys, I think that's another massive advantage for them. And the fact that you mix in somebody like a Caris LeVert, especially, that's one that I think that for the Cavs, if I'm a player in free agency and I'm looking at this Cavs team and I'm looking at them saying, you know what, I think I can go ahead and pick up a role with this team. And I mean, a guy that, former Cavalier now, but Lauri Markkanen, somebody who, was that everybody talked about from Chicago. I remember hearing going into the season last year of why the hell is this guy out there starting at the three? There's no chance. And all of a sudden he's winning comeback player of the year in the NBA with Utah. And I think that's something that, the Cavs development staff needs a lot of credit for how a lot of these players have taken those next steps and able to, feel comfortable in these roles too. And I think that's going to be an interesting aspect of this going into next year too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, if you're looking for bright spots, it's, Caris acquitting himself well, Okoro playing to a level where fans are calling for him when it matters in the playoffs. Like, I would have liked to see Isaac Okoro play a little bit more throughout the series. Obviously, we don't know the full extent of the health and everything like that. I don't know how much of a factor that even was. But the fact that he played himself to that level, I think is an encouraging step forward. And we'll see what this ends up being, man. I think your point about the development staff is bang on, and this is going to be a really, really important summer. And the Chase Down podcast will be continuing throughout the offseason. We are now switching to our once a week format. Maybe, every now and then there might be a little special episode. You never know, but we will be back next week. Carter will be joining me. We'll do a recap of this Knicks series, kind of collect our thoughts over the weekend, do that, go through some season recap stuff. And, before we know it, we'll be at the draft. We'll be at the free agency. This is going to move quick, man. I just already know. But Mac, thank you so much for coming on once again. We really do appreciate it. Big thanks to everyone tuning in live on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you're staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.